What is up, my adoring fan base? I just wanted to do this little commentary, reaction, analysis video because this guy, let's see who he is first of all. This guy sucks. This guy is a loser, and if you're still watching his show, I'm sorry, but you're a chump. Okay, you're what they call a chump. I wanted to make another little psychological profile of the essentially the Redditor. I would say the venom, the weakness, the weak point. If we're talking about RPGs, the Redditor is weak to sincerity. If you sincerely express yourself in art, the Redditor, like he dissolves like the Wicked Witch of the West. And this guy pretty much exemplifies the Redditor. Take a look at this. We already have some of the very easily identifiable characteristic Redditor traits. We have the Bill Maher-esque, ramblomatic, like neon sign thing going on. He's sort of looking for that like throwback look, but not really throwback because philosophically, internally, he's not a throwback. He's completely modern, completely liberal, all that stuff, right? But the psychological profile of the Redditor I was looking to make is very reductive, very insincere. And the reason the Redditor is so weak to sincerity, like his RPG weakness chart, is because the Redditor is fundamentally insincere. He is dismissive, he's reductive, and he is self-conscious. He can't approach things through as they are. He can't approach the object and accept it as it is and appraise it based on what it is. He can't say, this thing is good because of these qualities that it has. He can only say, I didn't like this thing, or I had fun when I interacted with this thing, or my experience with this thing was this. He can't appraise the object, only his reaction to it. And that is, of course, due to the fact that he can't be sincere. He is self-conscious. So he reduces things to, little dismissive quips and witty jokes. And that's where the Bill Maher comparison, of course, comes from. Bill Maher does it on purpose because he is an agent of the Sincerity, but that's a different thing entirely. Anyways, another characteristic of the Redditor is his sort of wanting to be a throwback. He wants to have this sort of throwback persona, like with the neon sign, the fedora, the little outfit he has on his character, the martini glass, but he is himself not actually a throwback internally. He only has the veneer, the facade, the superficial appearance of one because he wants to make himself more personable, because he is self-conscious. But that self-consciousness is once again reflected in the fact that he is not internally a throwback. It is a facade. He is a liar. He is a deceiver. He is a shill, so on and so forth. Anyways, going a little further with that, I want you to notice the very characteristic alcohol, using alcohol as a character trait. And it is different from the sort of, I'm sure anyone in this audience who knows people who like to go out and have a drink, that they actually like the taste of alcohol. They like drinking alcohol. The Redditor doesn't really like that. The Redditor likes alcohol as a character trait, which is why you see all these Redditors having their microbrews and their IPAs and all that bullshit. It's because they need to find ways to make alcohol taste good to them, rather than simply enjoying what it is. Some people enjoy alcohol as it is, but Redditors can't do that because, once again, they cannot enjoy objects as they are, according to the qualities of the object, only their reaction to it, only as they can use it through their self-conscious lens. So that's why he has that little martini glasses, because he needs that as a character trait. So, let's continue.
I have a lot of respect for Hideo Kojima's making.
Why is that? He hasn't made that many good games, if any truly good games. So let's continue.
Yeah, franchise.
Oh, also note the servility. Let's go back to that frame. The Redditor is very servile. He bows his head down according to what he perceives to be sources of authority that cater to his specific needs, his self-conscious desires. He doesn't want to be, and notice how he portrays Kojima as well. That's a very key point we'll go over. But authorities that specifically cater to his self-consciousness. And, there's another Bill Maher comparison. Bill Maher, he doesn't like normal authority. He doesn't like moral authority. He only likes authority to the degree that it allows him to live out his degeneracy. But let's continue. Blah, 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 blah. Another thing the Redditor does is the Redditor often makes very unfunny jokes. He needs to make everything into a joke because, once again, he cannot approach sincerity. It's a symptom of his insincerity is the constant joking, especially dismissive humor. For instance, the dismissiveness comes with whatever he does, and the reductiveness comes with whatever he does because he must reduce the object down to something that he can dismiss. He can dismiss a joke, and thus he has to reduce Hideo Kojima's career to a joke, which I think Kojima doesn't have a very great track record in terms of making games. He has an okay track record, but not a great one. Either way, I wouldn't reduce it to a joke because I think you need to analyze his games as they are, which is not jokes. They are video games. They need to be played. They need to be appreciated. Okay, but the Redditor cannot do that. Anyway, let's see what he has to say.
Metal Gear is, much like all Kojima's work, an absolute six-lane pile-up of disjointed emotional tones, inconsistencies, and terrible overwritten dialogue, but
none of that is true. Literally none of that is true. Another characteristic psychological complex of the Redditor is, in relation to servility, this connects to servility, is his need for consensus. What he just described is a very common consensus from game critics in the mid-2000s was that Kojima's games are full of stuff that doesn't make sense. It's full of silly things that we can't comprehend. They're disjointed. They are essentially ridiculous. He reduces it to something that he can ridicule and dismiss, right? See how this psychological profile is already coming together? See how he just perfectly exemplifies it? Anyway, none of those, once you actually look at Kojima's games, none of those are really true. So disjointed emotional tones is not true. All of the games actually have very consistent tone. They only change tone in places where it is, appropriate, in places of levity. And then they sometimes they even use that levity to actually hit you really hard with something brutal. Like, let's say Metal Gear Solid 3, right? When Snake puts on the, what's his name? The Major's mask, or whatever it was. Not the Colonel. I think it was the Major, Lieutenant, Sergeant, whatever it was. He uses the mask of Rykov, and then he infiltrates the interrogation room, right? To get back Scientist, whatever his name is. And you think it's a moment of levity because the joke is, oh, Colonel Volgin, he's a sadistic bisexual, right? And you get the joke is that, oh, Colonel Volgin, who is supposedly the super threatening, evil lightning guy, is actually just deep down, he's really just a sadistic deviant, right? But of course, we turn that on its head because once we are reminded the fact that he has repeatedly violated Ava, he has used Ava as an object for his sadism. So we're brought back down to reality, the brutal reality of the situation. And then that's compounded even further with the fact that this is one of the most brutal scenes in the game, is where Snake loses his eye. He's tortured with lightning, and of course we do get the idea that Snake could die here. I mean, we know subconsciously, because it is a game, that he won't die, but he nonetheless is threatened. And this, you are taken as the player, since he is your avatar. You are put in that brutal situation, right? So whenever he uses levity, he also uses it to, bring lucidity to the situation. Inconsistencies is not true either. In fact, I would say Metal Gear Solid, or just the whole Metal Gear franchise, is one of the most consistent franchises in terms of themes, in terms of the victimized or exploited soldier fighting against despotism, fighting against injustice in his own way, through the mechanism of the mission. Of course, the substance of the narrative is not what happens, but the themes. Why do things happen? That is the substance of the narrative. And even the substance, the themes, are consistent from game to game, you know? So I don't see what he's talking about. And then overwritten dialogue, they do have info dumps, I will give them that. They do have a lot of exposition dumping, especially in 2. I would say 2 and 3. 3 has a little bit of that, a little bit less than 2, but even in 2, the point is that 2, you know the least. You know, Raiden is a guy who knows the least, so you can argue for it from a contextual standpoint. So once again, the Redditor is using insincerity to construct a false reality that he can more easily accept through his self-conscious lens.
Terrible overwritten dialogue, but as a scholar of narrative gaming, I'm impressed.
Is this guy really a scholar of narrative gaming? Because having skimmed this video, I can say certainly that he isn't. In fact, I can say almost certainly that he's a liar, and he purposefully presents things not as they are. He presents essentially obfuscated false evidence.
Bleep bloop top-down pixel stealth them up.
Redditors really love silly words because it helps with their insincerity, and it's also reductive and dismissive. As you can see, we are very quickly building a psychological profile of this man.
All of the notorious nonsense of the Metal Gear canon stems from one single fact, that the main villain of the first game was named Big Boss.
Well, we're also presupposing that the narrative is confused and doesn't make sense.
And this is something I can only marvel at, considering what little thought must have gone into that decision at the time.
What the fuck is he talking about? Why are we portraying Kojima as someone who doesn't give a fuck? Because if you look at his interviews, he is someone who really cares about the work he puts out. Even if it's bad, even if I think not all of it, in fact, most of it is not that great, he does care. That is really the one accusation you couldn't make against Hideo Kojima, is that he doesn't care enough. He cares a lot, he just cares about the wrong things. But of course, you wouldn't understand that because you don't actually care about what you're reviewing. You are an insincere Redditor loser. Anyway, we'll continue.
And let's not pussyfoot around it. It was really fucking stupid to flat out call the Big Boss character in the game Big Boss.
This is another problem with Redditors. Most of the things they critique are accidental, so they like critiquing plot points. They like saying, I didn't like that plot point. If that's his code name, that's his code name. Again, they cannot approach the object as it is. You know, they have to have some little witty quip, joke, or dismissive opinion about it.
That's something a 6-year-old would call themselves if they were playing heroes and villains on the school playground.
And there it is.
One of the recurring aspects of Kojima's writing is that many of his characters are utterly defined by their code names.
The character explains the code name, not the other way around, and this is true for literally everyone. Solid Snake and Liquid Snake display the opposite phenotypes. They are thus different states of matter, right? And then you have Solidus, which is something in between. So you have Solid, Liquid, and Solidus, and those are code names designated to them based on what they are, right? You have the boss. She is literally the greatest soldier, the boss of all soldiers in terms of the Allied forces, right? The Soviets and the Americans and British and whoever, right? Because they all worked for the philosophers, and she, being someone who was brought up to do that, is thus called the boss, right? That's how she gets her code name. And then the fear, the pain, so on, right? And he's going to talk about the fear, actually.
An example was the Fear in Metal Gear Solid 3. Scary dude with crossbow and detachable shoulders, yeah, but what was his real name?
That doesn't matter. None of that matters.
What school did he go to?
That doesn't matter.
Has he ever fallen in love or owned a hamster?
There's that dismissive, quippy joke. If anything, he's not really asking any of these questions. He's only posing them for the sake of comedy or dismissiveness or reductiveness. Again, there's that insincerity in the Redditor's psychology.
None of that matters. All it does is that he's called the Fear and consequently is a scary bloke. And when Kojima...
He cannot describe the issue with that. He only presupposes that it is an issue. He can't logically prove that it is one. As a Redditor, he is confronting only his reaction to something rather than appreciating the object for what it is, for the qualities it has.
Kojima named his villain Big Boss, he inadvertently wrote himself into a corner because then no other character could occupy the role of Big Boss in...
Here he is creating an insincere narrative that his self-conscious Redditor brain is capable of accepting, rather than saying, Kojima thought, I'll give the bad guy the codename Big Boss because he's the big boss, right? And that's how codenames work, right? Why not? Or because it's a cool name. He can do that. He's the writer. And it's also completely wrong to say that no one occupies the place of Big Boss. In literally every Metal Gear, you are fighting the big boss of the enemy forces. How is it untrue that no one else can be Big Boss? Literally everyone else has been Big Boss. Not everyone else, but plenty of people have been Big Boss. So this is just a straight up lie. And him arguing that he is the credential of scholar of narrative gaming, that is pretty pathetic. That is a very pathetic thing to call yourself if you've already lied about this many things, especially just to appease your own psychological complexes. That's very pathetic.
Followed in the subsequent Metal Gear Solid series had to in some way stem from Big Boss, with
he could have made the Metal Gear games about anything. And in fact, he has made them about anything. And a lot of people thought Metal Gear has to be about Solid Snake. It has to be Solid Snake. Metal Gear 1, 2, and Solid. It's gotta be Solid Snake. Right? But he makes Metal Gear Solid 2 and it's Raiden and everyone's pissed off. So this idea that the narrative has to be about something is a essentially lie about Metal Gear in order to create consensus so that you can thus accept these things. Servility to consensus is another psychological complex of the Redditor when we are doing this profiling. It's a very effeminate trait. There have been studies that people with essentially more masculine traits, people who have more testosterone, are less likely to actually conform to consensus and more likely to simply believe what they think is true and right, regardless of the popular position on whatever it is. The Redditor it takes a very scientifically effeminate stance on these things, and what he's doing right now is trying to construct consensus. He needs people to consent to this opinion in order for him to accept it, because otherwise he has to accept the truth, which is that Metal Gear can be about whatever the fuck the writer wants it to be, which is something he can't accept because it's sincere. If the artist is able to sincerely express himself, that goes against the Redditor's fundamental insincerity, his fundamental self-consciousness.
Hoping not to define everything in Kojima's world, so the process of exploring the character's backstory inevitably involves the backstory of the codename.
Again, he's just misunderstanding how codenames work. Codenames come after you define what you are, and then the codename relates to that definition, right? At least in Metal Gear Solid, you can, in real life, things get crazy codenames, but that doesn't matter.
In Metal Gear Solid 3, we are introduced to...
Because he's a Redditor and he can't confront things sincerely.
Jack, or John, another name choice that probably didn't require much thinking time, but it...
Actually, it does require thinking time, because if you look at the essence of the narrative, the point is that Jack John is the successor to the boss because of how he is trained. It is not because of his genes. This prequel runs counter to how Big Boss has been portrayed, but not how you have the conclusions you can draw from the themes of those games. The themes being that... Sorry, just had to have a biscuit and another sip of coffee. Anyway, so back to Jack and John. You are shown in Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 that although we would think that genes matter the most, like the reason Solid Snake and Solidus and Liquid all have the genes and are so good at what they do, is because they have Big Boss's genes, right? And you think, well, genes are the most important, right? But of course, at the end of every game, they show that genes aren't important, memes are. how you are taught, how you are trained, right? That's what matters, what you do and how you've been, essentially the ideas and things you've been introduced to. I wouldn't say culture, because what they are part of is not a full-on culture, but that mimetic lineage, the mimetic lineage is much more important than the genetic, right? And we see that with Raiden, Punish Venom, who else? I mean, even Kaz and Ocelot are proof of this, right? Sure, Ocelot's a good soldier because the boss is his mother, but there's certainly more to it than that, because Ocelot would have beat Snake in both of their duels, but he didn't. The point is that with Jack and John, those are actually both implied to be aliases. That is literally the name they give to an unidentified dead body. The point he's saying when he said to paramedic, yeah, my real name is John Doe, and she laughed, paramedic, being a medic, knows that a John Doe is an unidentified body. It could literally be anybody. So Snake telling her that means I could literally be anybody, and that is the point. That is like the whole point of Metal Gear that you're missing here. Him saying this completely discredits any claim he has to being a scholar of narrative gaming, because the point of Jack and John not only being plain names but being aliases is anybody can be Big Boss if they are introduced and initiated into the mimetic heritage of the perfect soldier. That is the idea that Kojima wants to convey, is that anybody can be great, and that's why he has Snake and the inheritors of Snake, Big Boss's, Vic Boss's legacy, be the avatars of the game, is because you as the player are being introduced, initiated into this mimetic lineage. So like he just has no idea, no understanding of this, because he cannot approach what the object is. He cannot appraise the object. He cannot appraise the game. He can only look at his dismissive little Redditor idea of it that he wants to have because he's so self-conscious about himself. It's pathetic, honestly, and you miss so much about these games. Like, in terms of what Kojima wants to achieve with the mimetic image idea of Big Boss, he has certainly achieved it with some of these, at least.
Doesn't matter much. Big Boss before he was called Big Boss and was merely a jobbing infiltration expert mentored by a hyper-competent female soldier named The Boss, which seems like something.
Dude, you're so close. You're so close. You almost get it. You have literally described, like, the point of the game. That is the point, is that he's a plain guy. All these, like, soldiers with these crazy abilities don't mean shit to him because he was trained by the greatest ever. Like, dude, you're just so stupid. It's incredible how stupid and, like, what an absolute Redditor this guy is.
Official title rather than a nickname, one that is acknowledged globally, as she's well known to all the Russian characters as well. Christ only knows what international body bestowed.
We do know that. That is literally the philosophers, and you know because you've played Metal Gear Solid 3. I mean, he shows that he has played the game later, but nonetheless, the reason she's called that is because, first of all, she is the daughter of one of the philosophers. She was trained from birth to be basically the best soldier ever, right? And that's why she's called the boss by all the Allied forces, is because the philosophers controlled all the Allied forces. She explains this in the final cutscene. It's not that hard.
You don't know what her real name is.
It doesn't matter what her real name is.
Again, it doesn't seem to matter that much.
Exactly. You understand it. Why are you so, like... This is just pathetic, dude. This is the scholar of narrative gaming, by the way, critiquing the plot points instead of the actual substance, the essence of the narrative, which is not the plot points, it's the themes, the meaning, the ideas conveyed.
The point is, the boss goes rogue and Jack has to kill her afterwards.
No. Again, like, hold on. Going back to the massive spoiler thing, why are you warning about spoilers, bro? You were doing the opposite of spoiling this game. You're summarizing the plot on the back of the box. What actually happened is she did not go rogue. What happened was Colonel Volgin acted against the plan. He detonated the Davy Crockett. Literally, everyone knows this. If you watch up to the final cutscene, if you watch watch the credits of Metal Gear Solid 3. Anyone who does that knows this. She did not go rogue. It was planned that she would go undercover in Colonel Volkin's unit. She would be a double agent, right? What was not planned was him detonating the Davy Crockett. When he detonated the Davy Crockett, the Russian government wanted retribution. So the United States government, having already planned an infiltration mission, presented that mission under the guise of it being something they thought up on the spot, and thus they used that guise to sacrifice the boss, resolve the errors in the mission, and then retrieve the philosopher's legacy. And you do know this, and you're lying about it, which is actually even worse. Constructing a lie just to appease your Redditor sensibilities and calling yourself a scholar of narrative gaming has gotta be one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen a YouTuber do.
The fucking president shakes his hand and says, with a straight face, since you surpassed the boss, now you get to be called Big Boss.
Redditors selectively suspend their disbelief. They have rules under which they suspend their belief, and if they break them, then they stop suspending their disbelief and they lock back into dismissive Redditorness, right? Like when someone has a lightsaber in Star Wars, they don't say, actually, that's impossible. Plasma can't do that, or hard light doesn't act that way, or whatever lightsabers are made out of, I don't know. They say, whoa, that's epic. I love Star Wars, right? Redditors actually don't like Star Wars that much anymore because everyone's kind of acknowledged that it sucks, but you get the idea, right? But in Metal Gear, because Metal Gear is something they're not prepared to accept, because there's no consensual, I guess that's the rule, is they have to see everybody else a popular suspension of disbelief before they actually suspend their disbelief and say, okay, I will accept the plot points, the accidents of this narrative as they are, and look into the deeper meaning of it, the substance of it, the essence of it, right? But they just can't do that because, again, with the psychological profile we're building, we've seen they are insincere and they like to reduce things to jokes that they can dismiss, all because of their self-consciousness. We've already pretty much built an effective psychological profile. Let's continue.
Big Boss responds with a mildly disgusted look, somewhat mirroring my own, as I thought, don't tell me that's what this whole thing was leading up to.
No, dude, bro. No, the reason he has the disgusted look is because he was forced to kill the boss by his government because of a mission they screwed up. Really, the boss screwed up, and I talked about that in my video, The Delusions of Liberalism, which is it's my appraisal of Metal Gear Solid 3, which everyone should watch because it's totally good. And I totally didn't fuck up the audio by trying to have a military radio effect that didn't actually come out sounding good at all. But besides that, you should totally watch the video because it's totally freaking awesome. And either way, he does know why Big Boss was actually upset in that end cutscene is because they just exploited the boss like a human asset and tossed her aside. And that's what he learns, is that if he is a human asset to a government, he will be exploited, right? And that's why in Peace Walker he goes off and starts the Soldiers Without Borders. You know this, bro. You know this, and you're lying about it. You are not a scholar of narrative gaming. Also, that's a fucking stupid-ass title. I've already shown that there's no such thing as a narrative medium, so come at me, bro.
I have so many questions about the boss. The series delves into her...
Why? You're told everything you need to know, bro.
Backstory a lot more than it does most of its characters, but everything we learn only raises further questions.
No, these questions don't matter. The facetious Redditor question is very characteristic of the Redditor as a whole. So, like, George R.R. Martin, that quote about him asking what was Aragorn's tax policy, that is the facetious Redditor question right there. Like, in a nutshell, that is a synecdoche. You know, you'll hear a lot of people jokingly saying, what was his tax policy in relation to, like, bullshit questions that people ask about, fiction, right? Because, I mean, I don't think that's the correct use of synecdoche, actually. It's a microcosm for all the... It's either a synecdoche or a microcosm. I'm not going to look that up right now. For all the Redditor questions that are posed the facetious Redditor question. And that's what he's about to do, is like, where did she grow up? Where did she do this? What kind of freaking cereal does she like? Does she like cereal? Like, this shit it's bullshit, right? He's just introducing vectors by which he can say that the narrative is deficient, but they are not true critiques. It's not true appraisal of the object in question. It is his reaction to it. It is how he feels. It is an effeminate critique. How do I feel about this? Rather than, is the object meritorious? Is this good that it exists? Does it have good qualities? And they can't ask that because they are essentially not man enough internally.
She was the first person in space before Yuri Gagarin, but they hushed it up because question mark.
No, not question mark. They explained it.
Apparently because the mission went wrong and she almost...
Thank you for admitting that. Thank you for admitting like an actual plot point instead of just straight up lying about it.
Didn't survive, and the American government ceded the glory that would come from the first manned space mission because...
It's a plot point. That is what happens. Okay? Instead of critiquing what happens, why don't you actually look into the substance of the work? You know? But they can't do that. I did it off the cuff, alright? Because I've actually played this game. I actually appreciated it. I actually appraised it, and thus I can recall things I have concluded, evidence I've analyzed, and conclusions I have made. So I can do this shit off the cuff, right? He can't, because he's a fucking loser who lies about his credentials and lies about the things he's reviewed. Like this.
They were afraid of coming across like a bunch of fuck-ups. Boy, have I got bad news for you, American government.
You are British. You live in a surveillance communist caliphate, okay? So never ever talk shit about the greatest country on the face of the fucking planet, bro. Never ever come at us again like that, alright?
Also, they being the omnipresent group of powerful dudes who secretly run the world, called the Patriots or the Philosophers at various points in the series, whose mysterious agenda is second only to nanomachines when it comes to being used to hastily spackle plot holes.
Dude, like, no, that is literally the opposite of what is true. The Philosophers had a very clear agenda. They have a very clear directive. The boss tells you what it is, and then it is reiterated in the Metal Gear Solid 5 Codex. The Patriots are kind of like a different version of them, so I won't count Metal Gear Solid 2 as much, but the Philosophers, like, their goal is like really easy to understand because they tell you it. Okay, in one sentence, it is to unite the world under one rule. The Philosophers, okay, and they want a borderless, cultureless, maybe even languageless if you trust Cypher to tell you, but nonetheless an undifferentiated singular world. And the boss tells you as much, and she tells you that's her goal, is to revive that dream of the Philosophers. So it's not mysterious, and it's not hastily used to spackle over what the fuck ever in these games. Like, no. The Philosophers, because they were so powerful and because they disintegrated, that power vacuum affects the rest of world events in the fictional Metal Gear Solid timeline. So, like, this is not that hard to understand, dude. I feel like Alex Jones explaining the prequel trilogy to freaking pathetic nerds who didn't understand it, okay? Like, I mean, really, they were proto-Redditors, as those people who hated the prequel trilogy because it was too hard to understand. Like, shut the fuck up, okay? And Anakin is awesome, by the way. Just a side note.
Actually, more pertinent question, why was a heavily pregnant woman leading the Normandy landings in the first place? I know a lot of people praised MGS3 for the emotional impact of the final battle with the boss, but frankly, I just can't take her seriously. Listen.
Again, he is critiquing his own reaction to it. He's like, oh, this is too stupid. I can't take this seriously. I'm gonna go back to drinking microbrews and martinis. Like, shut up, loser. You can't appreciate what it is, dude. You will never be able to actually accurately appraise and appreciate anything as long as you have this pathetic, self-conscious, reductive, dismissive Redditor mindset. And that's why we need to build this psychological profile, is so these people can be shamed.
Super hot boyfriend who can levitate and talk to dead people, but you can't meet him.
You literally have a boss fight against him, so why are you lying again? Why are you making up this bullshit just to satisfy your own fucking effeminate needs?
He goes to a different school. school, and also I shot him in the face. So the character is ridiculous, but that's why this time...
Honestly, this whole video is really just that. It's an appeal to ridicule. I guess that's another characteristic thing, is the appeal to ridicule. And that connects all the way back to the Bill Maher show that we mentioned at the beginning. Bill Maher's whole thing is an appeal to ridicule. He doesn't know how to argue. He doesn't know how to make points. He has no initiation into actual traditional philosophy. He's an idiot, but he uses appeals to ridicule to sort of generate consensus and, you know, satisfy his need to be seen as smart. So that's that.
Of actual human beings rather than entities conjured purely to act as functionaries for the plot. But
that is the complete opposite of how these stories are structured, bro. Why are you lying? You're lying again. All these stories are about characters. In fact, you're not only lying about the story itself, you are contradicting the proposition you made at the beginning, which is everything revolves around Big Boss and the people he influenced, mimetically or genetically. So, like, how can you be this inconsistent? You're lying about the game, and you're lying about what you just said minutes ago. You're a loser. You're a loser Redditor from Britain. That's like a triple threat.
What she actually wanted is severely open to interpretation.
No, it isn't, dude. She literally tells you at the end of Metal Gear Solid 3, right before the final boss fight, she literally tells you, I want to revive the philosopher's dream. Why are you fucking lying? You are a loser, bro.
The boss is a prop, a character with no function except to embody this concept of a perfect, self-sacrificing mentor.
No, she isn't, dude. No, she's not perfect. In fact, she didn't even intend to sacrifice herself at the beginning. It's just something she accepted she had to do because the mission directives changed, and, you know, she's all about the mission, even if it's wrong, and that's where her error is. She felt that's like the point, bro. That is the point of Metal Gear Solid 3, is that the more perfect the soldier is, the more likely they are to be exploited by the mission directives, or as an effect of the mission directives they are given, okay? And to the point that they will eventually be sacrificed by the people they once served, okay? And that's what the Big Boss is so torn up about. Like, that's why he leaves the United States government and forms the MSF. You're so obviously lying about this that it's so pathetic. It's so pathetic seeing Redditors do their little song and dance about their quippy, reductive dismissiveness.
And the reason Big Boss was important in the first place is because he was named Big Boss.
Like, this is all wrong. You're still going about it backwards on purpose to try and create a narrative that you can actually make popular, put in the minds of people, and then you'll feel safe to consent to it.
I suppose even the most labyrinthine of canons have to start somewhere.
It's not that labyrinthine. He's still lying about it. To his last breath, he is pathetic and he is a liar. I don't know how you become this much of a Redditor. I guess my conclusion, I guess, for this video is just that this loser is from a different era. He ain't built for reality, okay? He ain't built for Hyperborea. And I wanted to show you this psychological profile so you can name and shame these people. That's my video for you. That is my detective case closed psychological profile on this guy. I appreciate everyone who's seen it, and I appreciate even more those who take it to heart. Thank you.